5 juveniles arrested for stealing the vehicle and shortly after being the target in a high-speed police pursuit on a busy highway, only to lose control of the vehicle and end up crashing. Their ages, all under the age of 18. 2 Toronto teens faced a combined 100 charges following a string of alleged gunpoint carjackings across the eastern Greater Toronto area. Their ages, both being 19 years. 6 young teens were arrested for kidnapping a man and stealing his vehicle in Whitby. Their ages ranging from 12 to 17 years old. 3 more teens were charged with stealing a company pickup truck in the downtown Whitby area after assaulting a 911 caller. Their ages being one 18-year-old and 2 15-year-olds. And just 2 months ago, in August of 2022, 2 14-year-olds were charged with driving a stolen car stopped on Highway 17 near the city of Pembroke, Ontario. Notice a trend here? The list of grand theft autos dealt to the public at the hands of juveniles and young adults is extensive and can range in severity from simple joyrides with their parents' vehicle to armed grand theft autos. The question that is asked upon hearing of some of the headlines is, why steal cars? Stealing cars usually does have a purpose behind it, being such as greed and illegal financial gains, social media challenges, showing off, being peer pressured into doing so by the wrong group of friends, or can be used to assist and aid in more serious crimes, like robberies, drug deals.
The illegal trade in small guns and ammunition, also known as gun running, is one of the several criminal activities that are frequently linked to international criminal groups. Contrary to other commodities used by organized crime, the illegal trade in small guns is more ultimately linked to community control than to monetary gain. According to academic estimates, about $1 trillion is spent each year on illegal arms sales. Arms trafficking was the 9th largest criminal market in 2014, generating an estimated 1.7 to 3.5 billion, while being one of the least lucrative illegal enterprises with a market value of 1.6 to 2.2 trillion. Due to its affordability and dependability, the AK-47 is one of the most luring weapons in the black market for weapons. A smuggled AK-47 normally costs $150 to $300 in Iraq. The proliferation of the new weapons during the first 6 months of the 2003 invasion of Iraq caused the price of the new AK-47 to drop to as low as $25. Comparatively, the AK-47 sold on the dark web in the United States can cost as much as $3,600 due to the fact that the expenses of smuggling illegal weapons rises significantly the further they have to travel due to the risk involved. A pistol that's smuggled from the US to Canada may see a price rise of 560% merely by going across the border. To hide the nation of origin and the original vendors, weapons smuggling frequently involves several quick journeys with numerous firms. Biker gangs have been linked to gun trafficking in the United States. In the late 1990s, American law enforcement organizations began looking into bike gangs and began categorizing them as an organized crime group. This was mostly because they were successful in seizing control of the prostitution industry and the smuggling of the stolen commodities like cars, motorcycles, and firearms. It has been a concern for police, according to Scott Blanford, assistant professor and program coordinator for policing and public safety at Wilfrid Laurier University. He explained that when firearms were used in crime, they were nearly typically long guns. To hear of anyone carrying a gun on the street was a very rare occurrence when he started policing in 1982. Criminals increasingly prefer pistols, revolvers, and handguns as their weapon of choice at this point. The sheer length of the land border and unpatrolled beaches, according to Blanford, a retired police officer who worked for 30 years, make it virtually impossible to stop the smuggling of American firearms into Canada. There was a situation not too long ago down in Sarnia where they're flying firearms across in drones. He said, "You can't be everywhere at once, and it's not vast shipments of hundreds of firearms coming across. It's the one or two that are easy to conceal and ship across the border that subsequently go for enormous amount of money."
Firearms dealing. Firearms. The fire in your hand that grants you eternal power, or maybe eternal wealth. As it turns out, criminals do not just use firearms for personal use and protection, but also to make a quick buck. These guns typically come from the United States, driven over. This is because it's very hard to get guns on planes nowadays. This being said, these guns are not manufactured in America or even directly distributed from the land of the free. These firearms take a very long route coming from South America and the Caribbean before reaching the hands of Canadian criminals. Criminals can get creative with their drop-off tactics, citing a recent event in Sarnia where firearms were accidentally dropped into a civilian's backyard coming from the United States. The firearms used by Canadian criminals are very typical, and we have not yet gotten as artistic with our weapons as the Americans have. Police in Canada typically seize Glocks and revolvers, with occasionally modified magazines, auto-sears, as well as subsonic and silencing attachments and technology. Although this is not the case for most firearms seized in Canada, it is becoming an increasing problem with the rise of 3D printed devices and plastic attachments. Firearms date back to the very beginning of Canadian history. We used these weapons for hunting animals during the fur trade, as well as our infamous battles with France and the United States during the beginning of our consecration as a country. Firearms began being registered in Canada in 1934 and have been under police monetization since 1977. This being said, we have never had a serious problems with firearms dealing in Canada, as we have seen our southern neighbors, the United States, and their southern neighbors in Latin America have a much worse problem. Human trafficking. Human trafficking. It sounds very scary. A very hostile practice, and it is. But you may never know a victim until you truly understand its roots. Human trafficking has existed since the beginning of human association. Kidnapping has been recorded in the first books ever. So what exactly is it? And is it kidnapping? No. And surprisingly, not everybody being trafficked is for sale either. Actually, this is such a small percent of the population, I will have to explain the separate problem that is oftentimes overlooked. Human trafficking occurs in many ways, the most common way being prostitution. Many people do not understand this because theoretically a prostitute could just leave, and theoretically they could. So let me explain. Many prostitutes are not informed of their job description immediately. As it turns out, it is quite the contrary. Many prostitutes believe that they've found a loving and compassionate boyfriend who truly cares for them. But this could not have been farther from the case in most cases. Girls are lured in, typically at a young age, normally ranging from 15 to 25. For the most part, these girls come from out of town, not from the big city, so they don't really understand it. Oftentimes, they have never really heard of the business of prostitution because their city's so small. So they don't know the business or the signs to look for. So this young girl is lured in to the big city by money, drugs, and a beautiful fairy tale. Soon she may become addicted to these drugs or financially dependent on her new boyfriend. Her boyfriend will then explain that she owes him now and that she has to work to pay him back. He can use blackmail as well as addiction combined with her long way away from home, and he may have even made her cut off her family before he presented her with this ultimatum. At this point, the young girl has no choice but to work. Typically, she will work out of a hotel as a prostitute, seeing as many customers as possible per day, until she pays off her never-ending debt. Thrown onto dystopia, if she is not already using narcotics, she may start and dig a hole of work to feed her addiction. She may even feel guilty for being so deep in debt, or still love her employer so much that she wants to prove herself to him and get that life that he initially promised her. Break and enter. So the glass shatters. Intruders run in. They take all of your belongings, but you weren't home. Chances are you will never see a home invader. This is because they are very meticulous about planning their robberies so they don't get caught. The last thing a robber wants is to be chased with a TV in his hands. These robberies can take hours if planned right. For example, you're on vacation, and these master thieves are also technicians and able to disable your alarm system. In this case, you would never know until you actually got home. Home invasions, or burglaries as they're most commonly known, are another crime that is very old, much older than the law itself. Although the onus of the organization of these robberies now lies on gangs, gangs are responsible for organizing robberies and scoping out the area. So what does this mean? A robber looks for the most reward with the quickest liquidation period at the lowest risk. This can be found in vacation homes, or the thing about vacation homes is they typically come in areas with very high security. So the lower security option is the individual's primary home, while they are on vacation. Wealthy neighborhoods are frequently scoped out to find which houses have been vacated. These locations are monitored for days to make sure that they're vacant during the time of the burglary. Insider information can also prove to be a valuable asset. For example, calling the individual's workplace to find out when they will be back for their vacation, so the house can be invaded accordingly before they return. Items stolen from breaking and entering include jewelry, electronics, and believe it or not, sometimes drugs. The smaller and more valuable, the better. Items are typically sold on the black market to other criminals or unsuspecting people. A robber would not like his customer to know he stole an item before he sold the item to them, because then they would want a better deal. There is truly no honor amongst thieves, even in business. Jewelry is oftentimes sold at pawn shops and melted down before the owner can track their belongings. Larger diamonds with GIA inscriptions will be cut down to remove the inscription, dramatically lowering the diamond's value. This is a shame, as diamonds like these are one of a kind, but why would a thief care if he had no knowledge of the diamond or no emotional attachment to it? So home invasions are typically done in a crew. The crew must consist of a driver. Without a driver, the goods cannot be transported on foot or a bicycle, because that's not ideal in escaping from the police, who may have been promptly informed of their actions already and in hot pursuit. The crew must also consist of a leader. The leader will have the final say on what happens, as disagreements will surely slow down any robbery. An individual on the outside is also needed to look up GPS locations, read any trafficking or tracking information, make any calls, or even to look up the value of an item. It is a good idea to include a crewmate with good technology skills who can disable an alarm system or a camera. It is imperative that this individual brings the necessary devices with them on the heist, or else you may be in for a surprise when the alarm rings. Finally, believe it or not, home invaders will bring a small member who is able to fit in small spaces Example, an attic, crawl space, vent, or small window. Drug dealing. Drug dealing is one of the most common activities for gangs to be involved in. Drug dealing can range from marijuana to meth and everything in between. There are billionaire drug lords and low-level street peddlers who all take pride in the same line of work. Drug dealing is a very sophisticated food chain that starts with the oligarchy and leaks all the way down to the lowest echelons of society. Drug lords can be worth insatiable amounts of money. Drugs can be very profitable. An example is Pablo Escobar, who grew up with cocoa leaves in his backyard and saw that Americans would pay top dollar. And this to him was crazy, but all he needed to do was modify these leaf extracts, and that wouldn't be difficult to make. And he got that over the border and started an empire. This started a sophisticated drug trade in the United States and Canada, where cartels and mafias can pay off the government to stay quiet. This being said, not everybody gets to live the Scarface fantasy. There are many starving drug dealers who live off their own supply and need to sell these small amounts to fund their addiction. Drugs work in the form of a fad for the most part. There are drugs like marijuana that stay relevant for long periods, hundreds of years, centuries, right? There are drugs like cocaine that lose popularity when the cartel takes a hit, such as briefly in the mid-90s when Pablo Escobar and a lot of his crew got locked up, but Pablo Escobar got killed. And again briefly in 2015 when El Chapo was captured. There are also drugs like fentanyl and some of these new opioids that are fads that people soon realize are too dangerous for even the most degenerate consumption. Most people join the drug trade as a dealer when they are young and impressionable. Mature adults will not join the drug trade because it is a job that requires little responsibility and nil dedications to anything else in their life. At this point, you do not need 2 nickels to rub together or know anything about your product. Drug dealers earn their stripes through murder and having a large customer base, and also, of course, a low profile. This can earn you a promotion that will make you a soldier. This is more than your first position of a runner. Now you will enforce your territory and direct your runners while dealing with bigger amounts that you run yourself. If you can do that well, you will be promoted to sort of a local captain, or what the mafia used to call a capo of sorts. You will be one of maybe 10 to 20 individuals in your neighborhood that control the drug trade around them. If you can gain the trust in your fellow captains, you may be promoted to the Don of your neighborhood, commanding all the drugs that pass through. If your gang is large enough, you may be province-wide and have different sets in different neighborhoods in different cities. And if you run your neighborhood with an iron fist, your allies won't encroach on your turf, although this has not always happened. Sometimes your allies will encroach on your turf, especially in the upstanding business of drug dealing. If you are an exceptional Don, you may be promoted to an international position out of the country, managing the distribution into your country or other countries themselves. At this point, you could be worth billions and may be on Interpol's wanted list.
As we have learned from this extremely informative video, there are many different types of criminals, many different types of criminal associations, with many different types of associates that all walk very different walks of life, whether it be the burglar, the gun smuggler, the drug dealer, the human trafficker, or the car thief. One thing's for certain, they're all products of their environment. So as a wise man once said, don't hate the player, hate the game.